Hello, everyone.
Hey, everyone. On YouTube, it's JT.
And Ariella.
So we're going to do a quick sound check before we get started talking about toxic bosses. In keeping with our Halloween theme here on YouTube, we're going to talk about those awful bosses that make your life miserable. But we can't do that until we know you're out there. So let's make sure, give us a little shout out, tell us where you're from, and if you feel like sharing the most toxic boss experience you've had, you can give us a little shout out. Or if you don't want to admit to that, let's do this. Put a 1 for yes, I've had a toxic boss. Put a 2 for I've never had a toxic boss. So 1 for toxic boss, 2 no toxic boss. All right. And so I think this is really timely. We technically should have done this session yesterday. Yesterday was the most underutilized holiday of all holidays. It's called National Bosses Day. And I'm pretty sure that nobody knew it was a holiday yesterday. And then that's because I think most people assume that bosses don't deserve this holiday.
Oh, that's too bad.
I know. In fact, let's test that. If you think that there should be a National Bosses Day, put A. And if you think there shouldn't be a National Bosses Day, put B. I want to see.
Interesting results.
A for yes, B for no. And given how many ones we're getting for toxic boss, it's like, dang.
Ooh, several toxic bosses.
Oh, and we're getting a ton of B's.
Man. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is gonna be a fun session today, I think.
Totally. But I'm just gonna totally give an overshare personal moment. So last night I'm sitting there doing some work at home on the couch, and I get this little text. It's from Ariella. And she's like, "By the way, forgot to mention Happy Bosses Day." It's like 7:00 at night. I'm cracking up, and what did I send back to you?
The nicest note saying,
"Every day is Bosses Day."
Is Bosses Day. Yes.
But legitimately for me, it is. Every day is Bosses Day when you get to work with the people that I work with who are willing to go after the vision and the passion and the ideas that I have and get behind it, you know? But I think, you know, there's a different environment that we have here probably. So I know that a lot of you probably have really crummy bosses or have had bad bosses. So I get it. I totally get it.
Yes, but it makes good stories for later.
It does.
Right?
It does. And speaking of good stories, so like really quick, we're going to show you what we're going over today. So we should probably bring up our little screen. Let's get tech savvy here, Anya. And we are going to discuss this idea of toxic bosses. I got to say, I posted a video literally yesterday afternoon, like late on LinkedIn, and just said, "Give me your definition of toxic bosses," and freaking tidal wave of people commenting on what a toxic boss was, and also a really interesting story about a toxic boss. So we're going to share that in a second. But Ariella jumped into the Google internet world and did some research, and you came up with some pretty cool stats.
Yeah, actually, this one was interesting to me. So a Harvard Business Review survey revealed that 58% of people say they trust strangers more than they trust their own boss. Isn't that insane? Someone you work with every single day.
Who signs your paycheck?
Yeah.
That's really crazy to me that explains why, you know, so many people aren't happy in their jobs, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. And then 79% of people who quit their jobs say that lack of appreciation is the reason for leaving. And that makes sense, honestly, because people leave bosses, not companies.
Right? Yeah, you know, and I really want to get into that. And I'm actually going to challenge you all a little bit on this because read that. They lack appreciation. A lot of bosses, a lot of companies are going to say, you get appreciation. It's called a paycheck. It's called income. And so I find it interesting that if we feel that part of our compensation should be appreciation, then that's a really interesting conversation that you need to be having around your concept of yourself and your partnership with your boss. So think about it. We always tell you inside the Work It Daily platform, in fact, shout out to all our active members who are watching today. You all know that we teach you to be a business of one, not an employee. Because if you're a business, then you're going to define what you want and you're going to build a partnership. And if part of that is recognition and appreciation, then that actually has to come into the discussion, and you have to build that into your relationship with your boss. So I'm going to challenge all of you out there, because a lot of people get grounded in the toxic box mindset because they feel like they're not getting appreciation. Now, I know there's lots of other traits that make a toxic boss, but this one I was specifically wanted to call out because it's common, and I think this is a fixable one, personally.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right, good. But you have another one that was really good.
We have one more. So 70% of employees report that the worst part of their job is their direct line manager. That's terrible. That's terrible.
That is
70%.
That's almost 3/4 of the working population say the
know.
worst part of their job is having to deal with their boss.
That's crazy. And like, I'm curious, like, obviously there's tons of reasons, and, you know, obviously there are some inexperienced people that just don't know how to do it. Some people who are just plain horrible.
Yeah.
So there's just across the board tons of reason for this. But.
Yeah, it's so true. And so before we got on the session today, I was being a complete wise guy, and I was like, Ariella, I really hope that you're not going to share any of your toxic boss stories in the last 7 years of your career. So we worked together for 7 years. I said, I don't know that I'm ready to hear that, but of course I would want to hear those things. I personally, after a lot of years in the working world, have had several very toxic bosses. And the one thing that I think it does is it makes you stronger. It makes you better. I'm always the silver lining person. You just need to know that about me. And I think toxic bosses are one of the most powerful experiences that you can have in your career. And the good news is, one of the first things I want to share with you that came to me on LinkedIn was a story about that. So let's take a look. So this was from a member who wanted to remain anonymous, but just shout out, you know who you are. You're awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this. And this individual wrote, JT, many years ago, I had a boss who by all outside appearances was performing, but by most accounts was toxic. We joked that he had a roulette wheel behind his armoire door that had our names on it, and he would spin it, and if your name came up, everything was your fault for the day.
Oh my God.
And then he'd say things like, you are good enough to be a dog walker in front of your peers. Or if you worked in a real insert industry, you'd know this or that. Learned a lot of stress management for myself, learned how to stand up for myself, learned how to not take things personally, learned the importance of a mentor in these situations to help work through it. I hope this gives you some material for class tomorrow. Yes, it does. 4 things right there. I mean, I couldn't have said it better than myself. When you have a toxic boss, you get hands-on experience with stress management, standing up for yourself against these individuals, bullies, right? Really learning to let things roll off, because you have to. Remember, you're being paid to do a job. Part of it is putting up with some crap, you know, and then finding a mentor. That those alliances, this is what we talk about all the time about networking, and, you know, saying, am I crazy? You know, that mentor is going to say, well, hey, try it this way or do it this way. You shouldn't be trying to do these things alone. Again, why we developed Work It Daily. Literally, I knew all these years in HR, I said, we have to build a way for people to get career coaching in these kinds of situations, because you don't ask your friends, you don't ask your family. They're too personal. They're going to give you some really bad advice. You need to come to the experts who can walk you through it. And so this particular person knew enough to get a mentor, but a lot of you out there don't. And my advice to you is you get a mentor, or if you don't have one, obviously you can come join us at Work It Daily and we'll be your mentor. But these are the absolute perfect tips for people who are dealing with a toxic boss.
Anything else that you would add? And if you're like in a situation and you're just like, how do I deal with this boss who's really making my week in life miserable?
Right. Well, you know, I think that we're going to see in some of the comments in just a second on LinkedIn, it's a lot of it is dissecting to what degree your boss is a toxic boss and what is causing your boss to be a toxic boss. Because and again, I'm probably going to get, you know, arrows shot at me right now. I think some of the time it is the employee who is kind of painting this picture that the manager is toxic without taking any accountability, right? There are truly toxic bosses. I will not disagree with that. But in my 15 plus years of experience as a career coach, I've encountered my fair number of people who just want to blame everything on the boss and call the boss toxic and not take any responsibility. And all I'm going to tell you folks is it takes 2 to tango. Right? We learn in HR very early on, there's 3 sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth. Our stories are subjective. The things, how we react to things is subjective. I've seen some people say, that's the meanest thing that manager said. He's such a bully. And I've seen someone sitting in the same room going, that's not what he meant at all. I didn't take that personally at all.
Right.
So, you know, toxicity is subjective. And I think that's something we have to think about.
Yeah, it's choosing how you're going to react to certain situations.
Absolutely.
You have a choice in the matter.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at these. So we got, I mean, a ton. These aren't even, this is just a handful of the amazing comments we got on LinkedIn. And just shout out to all the LinkedIn users that watched and participated. I love you guys. Thank you for doing that. But you had one that was particularly, that you liked on this page in particular.
So I wanted to shout out to Jana. She kind of defined, like, what is a toxic boss? And so she says, bully, arrogantly uninformed, and happy to be that way.
Yeah.
That's, you know, that's hard to work with. And happy to verbally abuse employees. It happens all the time, unfortunately. But if you can figure out a way to just choose to not deal with it, I think that's important. But
it's
finding
tough.
other people, other allies in the organization is also helpful as well.
I was with Janet on this one, and something I've been talking a lot about on LinkedIn. I've been doing a lot more video rants, so I love all of you who participate in the rants. But I've been talking about intellectual humility. We've been discussing that a lot inside the platform. So there's this real tendency right now in management for people to have a lot of intellectual superiority in an effort to show they know what they're talking about. I see a lot of toxic bosses who that's what they are. They're intellectually cocky. They act like a know-it-all because they think they're supposed to. They don't know any better. It's really a defend and deflect mode. And so when you see somebody doing that, you need to know that that's actually an insecurity playing out. People who have intellectual humility are very self-confident individuals. They don't feel threatened by others. It makes them a calmer, positive, better leader. And so to avoid toxic bosses, for all of you out there in job search mode, when you're interviewing, you should be looking at the intellectual humility of the manager that you're talking to. And if you've never watched our 8 questions to ask in an interview, it's a free video. It's our largest video here on the YouTube channel, over 2 million views. Those questions, you might not ask all 8, but those questions will give you massive insight into the level of humility this particular manager has, and that can help you make a better decision to at least avoid toxic bosses in the future.
Right, definitely. You want to control that from the beginning of the process. You want to learn as much as you can. And honestly, the interview is just as much about you learning information as it is about them learning information about you. So you want to make sure that you're going in the right situation.
Absolutely. So that helps you a little bit in terms of avoiding a toxic boss by knowing what they look like and how to avoid them. But we definitely got, even more things here about toxic bosses. And there was one that came up, and I don't know if it's on this page. Nope, this page, where we were talking about the idea of toxic environment.
Oh, yes. Where is that?
We might have lost that one.
It's gone, yeah.
It's kind of in here, but
yeah, there was one comment that we had gotten on this post, and it was about, the whole environment is making the boss toxic. It's making your relationship with the boss toxic, and it's just making everybody's lives miserable, not just yours, not just your boss's, and that's crazy.
And I love that you caught that, because I didn't when I was reading through them, and Ariella pointed it out, and I said, you're right. Sometimes we shouldn't blame employees or the manager for being toxic. It's actually the environment that they've been put in. If you were put on a desert island and there was only, one, box of food, you could see people come unraveled pretty quickly. And so when you're in an environment where the pressure's on in the office, maybe the executive team is, kill or be killed. If they've just created this really toxic environment, sometimes the nicest people in the world can become toxic because they don't know how to cope. So I think that that's something to be very, very careful of. The last thing I just want to say about this, and then, we're going to go to questions in a minute about how to deal with toxic bosses. So folks, you can start queuing those questions up. By the way, put the word question in all caps, and then your question after that, not in all caps. But I want you, before you assume a boss is toxic or you're in a situation and you start saying a boss is toxic, it's very important that you get objective about that scenario. So one of the things that Ariella and I will do inside Work It Daily as the career coaches in Work It Daily, we will say, list out everything that is toxic about this boss. So what are all the things that are creating a hot button and emotional stressors for you? And then we're going to take a look at those and see if there's any categories around it, but also see if there's any places where that fear and that anger, that frustration you're having is actually rooted in your own fear about yourself. So again, I mentioned at the beginning of the session, sometimes people push or claim toxicity because they're afraid that maybe they've done something wrong. And you need to sometimes take accountability for your actions. There's 2 parts to this dance. And so if you're acting a certain way, your boss could be reacting to you. And there just may be some things that you could do differently to get a different result out of this boss, to get a different relationship going. So we'll take a look at everything that's toxic. We'll also talk to you a lot about, is there anybody in the environment that has a good relationship with this boss? And if so, what are they doing? And is there some behavior that we could mimic there? We're going to try to work it through with you, because you know what, folks? If this is a good job and this is just the one part that's the problem, let's try to fix it. You know, there's not a million great jobs out there. You're never going to hear us say that. So if there's something we can do here, we should try to fix it. And then if we can't, if we know for sure this boss is never going to change and situation isn't going to get better and you can't control it, well, then we're going to build a strategy for you on how to move on and move on gracefully, right? So you shouldn't just write it off the moment you think a boss is toxic.
I would agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. Awesome.
All
okay,
right.
So we're going to be taking your questions. Again, today the show is about toxic bosses. Maybe you have a specific question about how to deal with toxic bosses. And then if there's any additional questions around that, we will address those. While that is coming up, and by the way, I'm laughing at how many people just reconfirm all the B's for people that just jumped on me. And those are people that vote there should be no National Bosses Day. And all the people that have a 1. And Donetta wrote 1A, which I would assume is like a 1+. 1 meant she's had a toxic boss. So I'm thinking, Donetta, you've had a heck of a toxic boss. So I'm sorry for you there.
Oh, no.
But I love all those that you've got going, guys. And you can keep giving us those numbers. In the meantime, while we're waiting for the questions, we want to introduce you guys to something that we're going to bring up. If you didn't know already, and we'll make sure you go, Work It Daily is the number one career growth club on the internet with its own very, very cool app. That's right. We're the only career coaching company with our own app. It's on Android and on iOS. And now we just turned on last week our 3-day free trial. So anyone that's ever thought about joining us, ever thought about having a career coach, you're saying, gee, it'd be nice to be able to ask these questions and get them answered by a pro. You can. And you can try it free for 3 days. So a lot of people get inside our program and go, why did I wait so long? I know that it seems weird to you. I think a lot of people see us as a nice to have, not a must have, until they try us and they understand how powerful it is to have a mentor at all times, to have resources that can give you the right answers, that can train you, to have 24/7 access to this stuff, and probably most importantly, to be part of a community of players. Mm-hmm. These are people, when you invest in Work It Daily, you are joining a group of players, true players, who are looking to level up. Folks, you hear this all the time. You are the 5 people you spend the most time with. So in each area of your life, you should be choosing 5 people that level up your game. If you are not surrounded by people right now that are leveling up your career game, that's why you get inside the Work It Daily program. That's why you get us in your back pocket. Because I am amazed the engagement and the people that are in the new platform. They're awesome.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Totally awesome. Not to mention that you're going to work with Ariella, Christina, myself, the team of experts, and also access to over 200 hours of video content that is not anywhere out on the internet. It is all behind this private program. So be sure to check it out and try it for 3 days for free.
Right.
Buy it. Go to the website, club.workitdaily.com. Download, try for 3 days. Download the app. Come join us.
It's worth a try, right?
It's absolutely worth a try. I think so. Okay, so let's see if we have any questions from our folks here.
So I have a question.
Okay.
What shouldn't you do if you have a toxic boss? What are some things you should avoid doing as an employee?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So folks, if you have a toxic boss, and let's define toxic boss. Mm-hmm. So a toxic boss is somebody who is always criticizing your work, is, changing the direction all the time, is taking credit for everybody's work, is pitting people against one another, right? Is, talking behind people's back, like they're criticizing your coworker when they're talking to you, et cetera, et cetera. These are toxic people, right? That's a toxic boss in my definition. So the first thing that I'm going to tell you is, at all costs, try never to be alone with that person. Always have somebody else there with you when you can. So if you're setting a meeting and you need to meet with your boss, see if your coworker can come with you. Find a way to work into the conversation that your coworker needs to be there with you. It's really smart to never be alone with a toxic boss, just so you know. So that would be my first piece of advice. Secondly, if you do have to work one-on-one with your boss, your toxic boss, I would take copious notes in the meeting, and I would, after every meeting, I would follow up with a written email saying, this is what I understood from our meeting, and this is what I understand my next steps to be. Can you please confirm for me?
Paper trail.
You got it. A paper trail. Toxic bosses, it's so important to have a paper trail. In fact, one of the comments, we didn't put it in here, but one of the stories someone shared on LinkedIn was this person got hired came in, was doing all these crazy things. All the staff knew something was going on. They went the paper trail route. So they all started emailing, following up, and that gave them something to forward to management to actually prove that this manager was lying in meetings and making stuff up, right? So they were able to see the paper trail and prove it. And they were able to get rid of this toxic boss in a month. And I was so proud of that story because a lot of times that doesn't happen. So remember, try not to be alone. If you have to be alone, always follow up everything, create a paper trail. Very, very important. And then the last thing that I'm going to tell you is that learning how to stand up for yourself with a toxic boss doesn't mean you getting aggressive, right? Doesn't mean, if anything, you need to learn how to stay as calm as possible around a toxic boss. A toxic boss is that kid in kindergarten that is trying to get a rise out of you. And so one of the best things that you can do is not let them see you get flustered. And so you just take a deep breath, you smile and nod, okay, sure, okay, and get out of there. And it's a lot of really toxic bosses are technically sociopaths, to be perfectly honest. So self-absorbed, so crazy. Their goal is to unnerve you. Sociopaths look to manipulate you and others. And so if you want to look up some information on sociopaths, we've actually written some stuff about it on Work It Daily too. You can do that, but don't let them see you sweat. Don't fall into it. Smile, nod, go back and put it in writing. That is the best thing that you can do in the toxic environment because they'll prey on the first time you lose your cool.
Yeah, great advice.
Great advice. Those are my 3 tips. Hopefully that helps.
It.
Okay, so it looks we got a question.
So Cece asks, what do you do when your boss is insulting you in front of other management? After she leaves, you ask if you heard her right, and she said, I don't know what you're talking about. Oof.
Yeah, that's really tough. So this is one of those examples. If you were inside the program, CC, we would have you write out what was the insult. So I would want to hear what you thought the insult was specifically, because if you go back to the boss and say, did I hear you right? That, you felt this way, and the boss says, I don't know what you're talking about. You now have to follow that up, CC. You have to say, I'm going to say, Ariella, did I hear you right? Did you really tell everybody on the management team that I completely screwed up and dropped the ball on that project? And Ariella says, I don't know what you're talking about. I would then turn away and say, well, Ariella, you said, quote unquote, this, and I need you to know how that makes me feel. I interpreted that. What I heard, Ariella, is you saying that I'm incompetent and telling everyone in the room that I'm incompetent. Is that what was that your intention? And if Ariella says, no, it wasn't my intention at all, then you can say, I would really appreciate if in the next meeting you would clarify that to the group, because for me, that's how I took it. And if I took it that way, I'm pretty certain that some other people in the room took it that way too. And it would really make me feel better to know that everyone understood that you did not see me as incompetent. Does that make sense? So you have to write down what was said and really look at it. You have to ask that. And if they say, I don't know what you're talking about, you have to repeat it back to them and then add in how you interpreted it, how it made you feel, and how you heard it, how it landed. And then ask them, was that how you intended it to land? And if they say yes, then you say, okay, well, let's talk about it. If they say no, that opens the door for you to say, I'd like a clarification. I'd like people to get on the same page about this because I think they're going to misinterpret what you said.
Right. You can just nip it in the bud right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome.
That's great. The other thing I would just mention there is that that is sometimes a great thing to do via email. Because talk about paper trail. If the boss says, no, I didn't mean it that way at all, and you say, well, I'd really love for you to bring it up in the next meeting, and they don't, you've got a paper trail to go back to, say, HR and say, look, I'm dealing with a manager. This is the problem. She admitted this, asked her to clear it up. She hasn't cleared it up. You're really going to need that kind of paper trail to help you going forward.
Well, the other thing is if you're feeling emotional about this situation and you feel like maybe I'm not going to say the right thing, I'm going to come across as, some way, it might be better to take a few minutes and just sit down, get your thoughts together.
Yep.
Write in an email.
Come inside, give us the email, let us look it over. I can't tell you how many emails to managers I've probably looked at inside the Work It Daily platform, just helping people make sure that they say things that are nuanced properly. When we're upset, we can write very emotionally and a bit too directly. So if you're going to do the paper trail thing, this is when it really pays off to have a mentor or a coach.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Now, I have another question. So let's say you decided to leave a toxic situation.
Sure.
How do you explain that in an interview?
Yeah.
Right?
Good question. That is a super question. So the one thing you always have to be careful of, which I bet a lot of people know here, is that however you explain a boss or a work situation in an interview, they're going to assume that you might potentially say the same thing about them someday. So just think about that. However you've interpreted the experience and share it, they're going to say, well, they might say the same thing about us. Every employer knows they're not perfect, right? We all have flaws. There are going to be some people that love it here at Work It Daily, some people that don't. It's not right for them. That's just how it is. And then you're going to have people that leave and say, oh my gosh, that was the best place ever. And then some say that was the worst. It's just how it is. So you have to think about, though, how that's going to land in the interview. So my advice is to be objective, which is talk about the things that you really appreciated about the place of employment. Always stay above board with that. Like, what was great about the company? Was it their product or service? Was it your coworkers? Was it their process? Was it how they treated their customers? Don't go down the path of talking about the manager. By not talking about the manager, not bringing the manager into the mix of positive traits, by default, they're going to recognize it was probably something there. Also, let's roll back to your stat that 70% of people, their biggest problem is their manager. Most of us know when we're interviewing you, you're probably leaving a situation because you're not in sync with your manager's style, which leads me to another thing. Just because you don't like your manager's style does not mean there's anything wrong with your manager's style. I say, for the most part, there are no bad employers, no bad people, there's bad fits. Now, again, there's exceptions to each rule, but more often than not, a toxic boss is not playing to your strengths and not playing to what you're looking for in a boss, but there might be somebody else that'll be totally fine with their style. And, an example of that in real life is Amazon. If you read about Amazon, a lot of people have been there and said it's toxic, it's awful, it's really hard, but I can show you just as many people that are lifers at Amazon and they love it. And they love the directness of the management style and they love the pressure. And so you just can't say that. So instead you say, I love this, this, and this about the employer. I thought it was great, but it was really time for me to move on and find some place with more opportunity. And also I was looking for a place where, from a leadership standpoint, I felt like I could learn and grow a lot more from them. In where I was, I feel like I was sort of plateauing in terms of what I could learn from leadership. And I really wanted to take my skills to the next level. So see how that's just a really nice way to transition that without throwing them under the bus?
I really like that.
Yeah, it's really key. But I'm glad you brought that up. We spend so much time getting people comfortable with how to answer a question about why you left your last employer, whether you were fired, laid off, quit out of just couldn't take another day of the boss. How you answer that question literally determines whether or not you're moving forward.
It's really telling, honestly.
Yeah.
It could be even just the way that you say something, what you say. It's really an important question to learn how to master.
Yeah, and I've seen people who've come into interviews and I've asked them that question and they're saying all the right things, but their facial expressions, their body language, their voice tone, it doesn't match. And you completely know they're lying. And so that's why we have to get you to a place where everything you're saying feels 100% real and authentic, but is also presenting a balanced message.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's great. All right, let's see.
Okay, question. How to avoid the email paper trail making you look needy, slowing down workflow, or following the plot, especially if you need to follow up with an email every single time?
So I don't think you need to follow up with an email every single time in order to have a paper trail. I think you pick your battles in terms of that. So sometimes you just deal with it. But, if once every 5 times that you're going to need an email, then go up with the email trail. I think that's important, but definitely not every single time.
Right.
Not necessary.
Awesome. A few questions from Tim. So question 1, are there different styles of toxic bosses? What are they, and how do you handle the different styles?
Yeah, I've always related it back to our communication style quiz. If you've never taken our communication style quiz, that is an eye-opener. A lot of the times, the toxic boss is your polar opposite. So if you can go take the quiz. It's free. Go to our website. We show you how to do it. There's commanders who are very direct, right? Very serious, very direct, very competitive. There's contemplators, very serious, very quiet, very tactful, don't talk a lot. There are empathizers, have a ton of empathy, ton of understanding, really worried about people. And there's energizers who are about, let's do this, let's stay upbeat, we can make this happen, right? So you've got these 4 personalities. They have strengths and they have weaknesses. There's no perfect style to be. Each of those can create a different style toxic boss. So let me walk you through them. The commander toxic boss is so intent, is so focused on getting results that they have absolutely no empathy or no self-awareness around the people and how they're feeling on their team. The contemplator is so quiet and so worried about saying anything that they're toxic in the sense that nobody feels like they're getting anything out of them. So they feel like they can never make them happy because they show no emotion. They come across like a cold fish, right? An uninterested person, aloof would be a term that you would see a toxic boss. Then there's the empathizer. These are the people that are talking about everyone, good and bad. So this is the toxic boss.
The gossiper.
Yes, is talking smack. Absolutely. Yeah. And then there's the energizer. And this is the person that just is so intense. You can't handle the energy. They're just so wound up is the only way to describe it. They're like the Energizer bunny, but when they're negative, like you're running and hiding for cover, right? Because they're just kind of just crazy, like over passionate.
And there's nothing wrong with any of these styles. It's because everyone has a different one. It's just how you react to them and how you interpret them, and obviously how you work with them moving forward.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And so another great reason to take the ISAC quiz, the personality quiz, communication style, is we not only show you in the results of that what you are, but what the other styles are and how you can be misperceived, right? So
really important.
If you're an energizer manager and you've been told you're toxic, I guarantee you're probably coming across like a narcissist, right? Do you want to know that? Yeah, you want to know that. So that was a great question, Tim. And the best way to handle the different styles is to learn the strengths of their style and learn how they prefer to be spoken to and try to work with that.
Definitely. Awesome. We have a question. How to get a great reference from a bad boss who thinks everybody is a terrible person. This is a great question.
Oh my gosh, it is a great question. I have to be honest. I think in this scenario, and it may not work for everyone, but I'm just going to tell you it did work for me once. As I went to a boss that didn't get along, bad boss environment. I was moving on. And I sat down and said, look, I know that we haven't had the best relationship, but I want to tell you 3 things that I really admire about you as a leader. And I told him the 3 things. And I said, I was wondering, you know that I'll need a recommendation and a reference. I would be happy to write a recommendation and a reference for you around these 3 things. Would you be comfortable giving a recommendation or reference around 1 or 2 of my qualities that I hope you felt were okay in spite of the fact that we didn't get along and that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things? Because, networking, it's important. We have worked together and I really recognize your strengths and I was hoping you could do the same for me. It totally worked.
I really like that.
And it was funny because as a manager, the logic worked for him. He got it,
You're each getting out of the deal with something.
Absolutely.
Right?
Which I think is so important for us to get to instead of just writing somebody off as all terrible. Finding 1 or 2 things that you can respect about their approach and letting them know. What a great way to open up that dialogue and say, well, how do you feel about me? Is there 1 or 2 things that we could agree upon that you could speak to? So if they call up and ask you for a reference, you could at least stay in that lane and talk about those 2 things for me. And I will always be happy to do the same for you.
It's awesome.
Simple, worked for me. It's worth a shot. I mean, the alternative is you don't get a recommendation at all. So
Right. Definitely.
Cool.
Great advice. Okay, question. Why does upper management select incompetent people to be bosses, supervisors, and leaders? I know they are building their team and alliance, but where does that mindset or how do they select come from?
Yeah. So a couple of things. Energizers and commanders are the most chosen for leadership roles. Energizers and commanders are most chosen for their leadership roles. Does anybody want to give a guess why? Empathizers and contemplators are least chosen for those roles. If you want to give a guess, you throw it in the comments. You have any idea?
I feel like it's because they're direct and got energy and they're willing to lead in a lot of places, but you can also tell exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. The reality is they are most likely to take on difficult situations. They are comfortable with conflict. They will engage with conflict. They believe conflict will bring about resolution. And as a result, that's what most companies are looking for, leaders that are willing to do the tough stuff. And in order to do the tough stuff, they probably come across tough, right? So empathizers and contemplators are people that tend to scale more on the side of really putting people first and would make a decision based on people versus the business first. And, that sounds great, but a business oftentimes to stay in business and keep everybody employed is going to need to make some tough business decisions. And so commanders and energizers tend to rise to the top in those roles because they're willing to make the tough decisions.
I'd also say, and I saw a stat yesterday about this, I wish I put it in, but a quality that people want in leaders is decisiveness. So if you're a contemplator, then who knows how long you're going to take to make a quick decision that is very important. And empathizers, same thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Keeping people on that shouldn't be on, that are underperforming because you feel bad for them, that's not a great business move. So they're looking, I've just seen time and again where like business is business and it can be really hard, and we have to try to pull our emotions out of that. And so for that reason, that's why you'll sit there and say, are they incompetent? Well, maybe they're not competent in certain areas. Maybe they're not empathetic, which is a lot of times what we're, talking about toxic bosses is lack of that. But if they've got that ability to make that decisive decision, to deal with that difficult situation, to create conflict when it's needed, they're going to get the job.
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. We got another question. Is it difficult to get a salary raise from a difficult boss?
No, it's not difficult, actually. It's not difficult if you know how to work the system. So the first thing you always do, and actually I'm going to give shout out here, the salary negotiation class inside Work It Daily is the bomb and was really designed by this girl. It is so freaking good. I had 2 people last week alone literally renegotiate raises in job offers using this class. So kudos to you. But when you are looking to get a raise from a toxic boss, the first thing you have to do is figure out what that boss values. You are a business of one providing a service. To get a raise, you have to justify the increase. And keep in mind, it costs the company about 130 to 140% of your salary. So if you want to make $60,000 a year, 140% of that is what it costs the company, because they've got to pay taxes, they've got to do benefits, administrative costs, etc. Okay? So if you want to raise, multiply whatever that raise is. Let's say you want a 10 grand raise by 140%, which means you have to justify $14,000 worth of value, if not more, because they're going to want to make more money off you. So let's just hypothetically do that. A $10,000 raise, you're basically going to need to show them at least $14,000 to $20,000 worth of value back. So you've got to sit with that boss and find out what they value and how to justify that. And then you're going to say, what would it take for me to just get a $10,000 increase? What would you need to see? How do I make that happen for you? And one of the best things to ask a toxic boss is, what can I take off your plate? What are some of the things that you hate to do, that you don't have time to do, that stress you out? What can I take off your plate? Because think about it. When you take things off someone's plate that they hate and they don't want to do you think they ever want them back on their plate again once it's been removed? I've literally seen toxic bosses keep the most random people in recessions and restructurings and layoffs. And you're like, how is Mary keeping her job? Why is Bill still here? And it's because Mary and Bill do these things that the boss never wants back on their plate. This is how you get a toxic boss to give you a raise and to keep you on. And so there's strategy there, folks. You just got to know how to work the strategy.
Even better if you can identify those things before you ask, because sometimes even just asking for work can be a little bit annoying. It's like, if you can identify some areas that you could help out, take things off their plate.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. So the team here is really awesome, and everyone always asks each other, can I take something off your plate? We always know when somebody is just got a lot. It just ebbs and flows, right? And a lot of times you just go, oh my gosh, that's so nice that you asked, but no, I'll take it all. So when somebody says, you've got this going on, can I take that off your plate? It helps them go, yeah, okay, you could probably do that.
Yeah,
and
mentally it's like
it
taking
totally
a
works.
block out of the equation and being like, okay, that's going to be dealt with.
Totally great tip there. Awesome. Okay, let's take a couple more questions.
All right.
Let's see. Oh, maybe we're good.
I think we're good. Yeah, because we answered Juniper's question earlier in the session. So if you want to go back about explaining. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, awesome.
Okay, so all right, let's do this. If you loved today and you found today helpful, give me a 1 and tell me the favorite tip that you heard today. Ooh. So give me a 1 if you loved it and what was the favorite thing you heard today. If today was not helpful to you in any way, give me a 2 and tell me what could have been done better. We always want your feedback, right? So take a moment to do that. 1, it was helpful. Here what was most helpful. 2, wasn't helpful. Here's what I would have loved to hear. We want to hear that from you. In the meantime, we're in keeping with our theme. Next week, we're going to come up with another scary, spooky subject. If you've got ideas, comments below. We'd love to hear topics that you want us to talk about, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's really important for us. I'm seeing a couple 1s. Yes, 1, getting a raise. I got another 1, getting a mentor. That is so key. 1, describing leaving a toxic work environment. Good.
Love
1,
it.
looking for a new career. All right. So
they're all different too. I love that.
That's so
great.
awesome, you guys. I love it. Awesome. Oh, even more. You guys are the best. So, And again, really quick feedback on how you guys like this new format. We just started this new live stream every week with Ariella and I, and trying different times of the week, dates of the week, to see what's working best for all of you. So please, you are our audience. What do you want to hear from all of us? How can we make this better? And then lastly, should we pitch them the free trial one more time?
Yes, the free trial. Check it out. Get inside the program. See what it's all about. Honestly, there's so much in there. In 3 days, you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
I have to tell you.
But
it's crazy.
But we're going to make you addicted. You're never going to want to leave once you're in there.
Especially when you get the app.
Yeah.
I'm addicted to the app.
The app is crazy. By the way, I'm in the app all the time. So
Yeah.
you'll see me in there with a little green, and they'll be like, oh, JT's in there again.
Yeah. It's
awesome.
fun. Yeah.
All right. You guys were great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will see you all next week, okay? Have a good one. Remember, if you want to win,
You got to work it daily.
awesome. Take care, everyone.
Bye.